With a dark, menacing look on her face, the queen stares down the meek servant woman and begins to question and threaten her with cruel words. She warns her that if Jonah dares to come anywhere near the prince again, she will have both mother and son banished from the kingdom. The servant trembles the entire time, not daring to say a single word in her own defense. And this scene happens to be witnessed by Elias, who has just returned. Seeing an innocent servant being scolded to the point of tears, the righteous and rebellious prince immediately takes all the blame upon himself. But the queen, in a cold and serious tone, repeats her belief once again. Between a prince and a servant, there is an unbridgeable divide. He must never be friends with the son of a servant. But Elias raises his proud head and stubbornly answers her. In his heart, Jonah is his own brother, and no one has the right to stop them from seeing each other. This violent confrontation drives the relationship between mother and son to its lowest point. In order to win back her son's heart and force his attention to remain inside the palace, the queen once again invites the circus to perform at court. It is the same scene as before. Back then, when this woman sat here, her face was filled with sorrow. But now, she looks completely happy. She sits in the very seat where the king once sat, constantly watching her son's expression and reaction. Just as the king once cared only about her, she now pours all her attention into her son. This shows that her love for Elias has reached the point where she would give up her life for him at any moment. That night, Elias seems unusually obedient and gentle. He even stands before the dressing table and tenderly helps the queen choose jewelry for the banquet. The queen is immersed in the joy of having her son return to her side. But she has no idea that the gentle young man standing before her is actually Jonah, dressed in the prince's royal clothes. The two identical boys have switched identities. And within the logic of the story, this becomes the ultimate mockery of class and bloodline. The queen keeps talking about noble blood and social rank, yet she cannot even recognize the body of her own son. This proves that what she loves is not her son's real independent soul. What she loves is the label of prince, the version of him that satisfies her need for control. But happiness soon turns into tragedy. The boy's whispers and dreams for the future are eventually overheard by the queen, who is hidden in the shadows. When she hears Elias naively planning that, once he inherits the throne, he and Jonah will take turns being king, the queen feels her whole body go cold. She trembles with rage. For the first time, she feels a crisis she has never felt before. That low-born shadow is slowly devouring and replacing her only son. Late that night, the queen storms into her son's bedroom, filled with murderous intent. By then, Jonah has already hidden himself in a panic. Only Elias remains in the room, his face guarded and alert. But this time, the queen does not immediately launch a grand search. Instead, she forces down her anger and begins to play the emotional card. She tries to use the pain of childbirth and the uniqueness of blood ties to awaken guilt in her son, but Elias has long grown tired of this heavy emotional blackmail. Having achieved nothing, the queen leaves the room in extreme anger and disappointment. But the danger is not over. Elias knows they cannot stay there any longer. He quickly arranges for Jonah to escape through the dark storage rooms beneath the royal chambers. They agree to meet again the next day. But when Jonah walks alone into the dark and winding underground maze, disaster strikes without warning. In the flickering light of the torches, a shadow holding a blade lunges at the boy like a ghost. Jonah screams and crawls toward the darkness. With the help of the faint light, he realizes in terror that the killer trying to devour him alive in the dark is none other than the noble queen. The body language in this scene is completely destructive. She has abandoned all her grace. Like a wild beast protecting its cub, she swings her weapon through the cellar. This extreme contrast turns the sacred idea of motherly love completely black. It becomes a terrifying force capable of physical destruction. Fortunately, the queen has no real fighting skills. Jonah takes the chance and escapes the storage room in the dark. For the next several days, Jonah never appears again. Inside the castle, Elias is burning with anxiety. One day, while accompanying his mother on the terrace as she has her portrait painted, he looks into the distance and sees the servant woman in the town square, packing her belongings. And Jonah, covered in wounds, seems to be saying his final goodbye to his mother. Ignoring the guards trying to stop him, Elias rushes madly toward the commoners' district. He anxiously asks what happened, but for the prince's safety, Jonah only bites his lip hard and tells him not to ask anymore. Because if he does not leave now, sooner or later, he will lose his life inside that castle. To comfort Elias, who is on the verge of collapse, Jonah takes him, before leaving, to an ancient tree so enormous its branches seem to cover the sky. Jonah pulls out a dagger and stabs it into the thick root. In an instant, a clear spring of water bursts from the cracks in the bark and begins to flow. Jonah tells his brother that as long as the spring remains clear, it means he is safe out there in the world. But if one day the water dries up, or turns muddy, then it means his life has reached its end. Watching Jonah walk away with absolute resolve, Elias finally lets go of his hand. From that day on, rain or shine, he comes to this ancient tree every single day. He stands beneath it, staring blankly at the spring, until one morning, when Elias comes to the tree again, he finds that the once crystal clear water has become terribly muddy. There are even faint traces of dark red blood mixed within it. He tells no one. He mounts his horse alone and leaves the castle without hesitation, setting out on an unknown journey to save his brother. Guided by fate, Elias eventually reaches an extremely poor village on the borderlands. The moment he enters the village, a ragged but beautiful country girl rushes toward him in tears. She throws herself into his arms and holds him tightly. Sobbing uncontrollably, she pours out her grief. Elias instantly realizes that the girl has mistaken him for someone else. But in order to learn what happened, he pretends that he fell on the road, hit his head, and lost his memory. Following her words, he slowly pieces together the truth. From the girl, he learns that 5 days earlier, Jonah entered the infamous Black Forest behind the village and never came out again. At the same time, the queen once again seeks out the sorcerer in black. Looking at this woman, now completely consumed by obsession, the sorcerer lets out a sigh, as if accepting the force of fate. If she wants the prince back, the queen must once again pay the price of one life for another. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, at the bottom of a steep ravine, Jonah lies with an injured leg, unable to move. When he hears the prince calling his name, he quickly answers in a weak voice. But Jonah's cry awakens the demon of the woods. With a piercing shriek, a huge and horrifying creature covered in black hair and scales drops from the sky. It opens its bloody mouth and charges straight at him. At this critical moment, the prince uses his own body to shield the servant's son with everything he has. Then something strange happens. The moment the monster's violent, blood-red eyes meet Elias's gaze, its massive body freezes in midair. For several long seconds, there is only dead silence. And in the monster's eyes, there appears a brief flash of human clarity. It is a complicated look, filled with terrible pain, reluctance, and twisted affection. This is the emotional peak of the entire story. The monster cannot bring itself to bite, because the prey standing before it is the only son it has ever loved in this world. Through this myth of transformation, the story gives physical form to the final stage of devouring motherly love. It turns that love into a bloodthirsty monster. But the young Elias cannot understand the grief and struggle in the creature's eyes. He seizes the fatal moment when the monster is stunned. With a furious roar, he swings the sword in his right hand. A cold flash cuts through the air. With a sharp thrust, the blade pierces deep into the monster's vulnerable neck, and the creature dies completely. The danger is finally over. Elias carefully carries the wounded Jonah out of the man-eating forest. After returning to the village, the prince finally sees the truth of fate. He does not force Jonah to return to the palace with him. Instead, at the entrance of the village, he embraces his brother deeply and gives him back his freedom. Jonah stays in the village with the country girl who loves him. Elias, however, returns alone to that cold and empty palace. Then comes a dissolve. The monster turns back into the queen. The mother has taken this disaster in her son's place. One life for another, and her face is forever frozen in a state of madness and pain. In the end, she uses her own life to complete her final and most desperate pursuit of her son.